The first sound I remember that night wasn't a voice. It was the dull rattle of the garage door closing behind me. That metallic slam echoed through the concrete walls like a verdict, sealing me away from everything I had built with my own two hands. The faint scent of motor oil mixed with cold air, and in that moment, I realized I had become a guest inside my own life. It's strange how humiliation doesn't always scream it settles. It spreads quietly, like dust in sunlight. And while most stories begin with a rising conflict, mine began with a sentence that landed harder than a punch. "You can sleep in the garage." Those were his exact words. My son-in-law didn't shout them. He said them calmly, with that smug tone of someone who believes they've just solved a problem. My daughter stood beside him, eyes darting between us, pretending to arrange the plates on the dinner table so she wouldn't have to look at me directly. I remember the faint music playing from the kitchen speaker, a cheerful song that didn't match the tension thickening the air. The turkey smell lingered, mixed with wine and disappointment. I had driven 2 hours to spend Christmas Eve with my family. I had gifts wrapped neatly in the trunk, hand-knitted scarves, a small box of chocolates, and a photo frame of my late wife and me holding our newborn daughter, decades ago. I thought it would remind her of gentler times. But nostalgia doesn't work on people who've outgrown gratitude. When I walked through the door earlier that evening, everything already felt off. My grandson barely looked up from his phone. My daughter greeted me with that polite, distant tone people reserve for guests they didn't expect. And my son-in-law, Daniel, always so impeccably groomed, always smiling too widely, offered me a glass of wine like a host at a networking event. I didn't expect fireworks. I just wanted a family dinner. But behind every forced smile, something darker simmered. The moment of truth came after dessert. The plates were cleared, laughter replaced by that uneasy silence when people run out of small talk but haven't yet said what they really want to say. Daniel leaned back in his chair, adjusted his cufflinks, and said, "Dad, there's something we've been meaning to discuss." I didn't like the word "we." It always means someone rehearsed this. My daughter looked down, twisting her napkin. He continued, "With everything going on, we think it might be better for everyone if you stayed in the garage room for now." I blinked. "Garage room?" He nodded, smiling faintly. "You know, the converted one. It's warm enough. We just need your bedroom for a while. My parents are flying in next week, and they'll be staying for a couple of months." For a couple of months. The same parents who used to ignore my daughter's existence until she married their son. The same people who never visited when my wife was dying in the hospital. And now they were going to sleep in my room, under my roof, while I slept next to toolboxes and a spare tire. I tried to keep my voice steady. "This is my house, Daniel. I built every corner of it before you even met my daughter." He shrugged. "Technically, the deed's in all our names now. You signed it over 2 years ago, remember? It's a family home. We all contribute." That sentence hit harder than the cold draft creeping from under the door. Yes, I had signed the papers 2 years ago. My wife had passed, and I thought it would make things simpler to ensure the house stayed in the family. I trusted my daughter completely. I trusted the man she married. I thought I was protecting her. I didn't realize I was signing away my dignity. My daughter finally spoke, her voice small but sharp. "Dad, don't make this harder than it is. We just need space. You can manage in the garage, can't you? It's only temporary." Only temporary. That's what they always say when they take something that's yours. I remember standing up slowly. The chair legs scraped against the tile. For a second, no one breathed. Even the music had stopped. "You want me to sleep in the garage?" I said quietly. Daniel smiled again, that same polite smile that now felt like poison. It's not personal. You'll have privacy. We'll bring a heater. I looked at my daughter. Do you agree with this? She hesitated, then crossed her arms. It's not up for debate, Dad. Please don't start. There it was, the confirmation I needed. Not just a betrayal, but of something deeper. The moment your child stops seeing you as family and starts seeing you as an obstacle. The garage was cold that night. There was an old mattress, a single bulb flickering overhead, and the hum of the water heater filling the silence. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dusty window. I could still hear faint laughter from the living room, muffled through the walls. My daughter's voice. His voice. They sounded happy, relieved, maybe even proud. Humiliation has a taste. It's bitter, metallic, like blood between your teeth. I laid down and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in the corner, an old calendar from 2014 hung crooked, frozen in time. I thought of my wife and how she used to say, "Kindness is never wasted." But I wasn't sure she'd meant this. That night, I couldn't sleep. The more I replayed their words, the more something inside me hardened. I realized kindness can be a trap when it's handed to the wrong people. It teaches them how far they can go. The next morning, the sun pierced through the narrow window, turning the dust into floating gold. I stood up, stretched, and walked quietly to the kitchen. Daniel was already there, sipping coffee like he owned the place. He nodded at me with that fake courtesy again. "Morning," he said. "Hope you slept okay." I nodded, too. Like a man who just realized he's been blind for years. He didn't understand. He didn't have to. My daughter walked in wearing her robe, scrolling through her phone. "Dad? Don't forget to take the trash out before noon, okay? The truck comes early this week." She said it as if nothing had happened. As if last night was just another small adjustment in her schedule. I stared at her for a long moment and simply said, "Sure." Because there are moments in life when arguing is useless. Moments when silence speaks louder than any confrontation. And that morning, silence was my weapon of choice. The days that followed were quiet but revealing. I noticed how Daniel began moving my things without asking, old photo albums stacked in boxes, my late wife's piano covered with a sheet, my gardening tools placed outside to make room. Each act was small on its own, but together they formed a clear message: you don't belong here anymore. Neighbors started noticing too. Mrs. Collins next door asked, "Why are you staying in the garage, dear?" With that sympathetic look that cuts deeper than pity. I laughed it off, saying the house was under renovation. But shame doesn't hide easily. And yet, underneath that shame, something new began to stir. A quiet, deliberate calm. While they believed I had surrendered, I was observing, counting, remembering every paper, every signature, every clause I had tucked away long before this family arrangement began. I had always been careful, even when they thought I was naive. That evening, I sat at the small workbench in the corner of the garage, a single lamp illuminating stacks of old documents. Deed copies, bank statements, insurance letters. I traced my finger along the embossed seal of a folder marked Property Transfer Agreement. And there it was, one small, overlooked line, the kind of line lawyers slip in when they assume no one reads the fine print. Primary ownership rights remain vested in the original titleholder unless formally notarized under joint asset division. Not notarized. Never notarized. My lips curled into something that hadn't visited my face in a long time, a smile. They thought I had given up ownership. They had no idea I still held the key. The next weekend, Daniel's parents arrived. The house filled with voices, laughter, and expensive perfumes. They didn't greet me. They didn't even glance toward the garage. It was as if I had already been erased. But invisibility has its benefits. When people stop noticing you, they reveal their true faces. From the shadows of my so-called room, I overheard conversations not meant for me. Daniel bragging about finally having the place under control. My daughter complaining that I never knew when to let go. His mother calling me the old ghost haunting the property. They laughed. It's funny how quickly love turns into entitlement. How people justify cruelty when they believe they've already won. That night, as they toasted in my dining room, I stood at the window, watching the reflection of my own face against the glass. Behind me, the faint hum of the garage light buzzed like an idea forming. There was no anger now, only precision. And in that stillness, a sentence whispered itself into my mind. They gave me the garage. I'll give them a lesson. I didn't sleep much after that, but I didn't need to. I had work to do. Because while they played house in my living room, I began drawing the blueprint of their downfall. A quiet, methodical plan. A lesson written not in words, but in deeds. And soon, the house that once exiled me would become the stage of the justice they never saw coming. The morning after their laughter faded, the silence inside the garage grew heavy enough to press against my chest. I sat on the edge of the small cot, hands clasped together, staring at the faint light bleeding through the window. Outside, I could hear birds and the distant hum of a lawnmower from a neighbor's yard. Ordinary sounds of life, but for me, they carried an emptiness I could not name. Humiliation does not vanish with sleep. It lingers in the corners of your mind like an uninvited guest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces again. My daughter's look of discomfort, Daniel's forced politeness, the way his parents avoided my gaze as they walked through the front door, as if I were the housekeeper and not the man who had built the very walls surrounding them. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. That peace is worth more than pride. But pride is the final thread a person holds before disappearing completely. I had already lost too much to let go of that too. That morning, I made myself a cup of coffee on a small electric stove I had salvaged from an old camping kit. The bitter taste reminded me of the winters when my wife and I would drink together before sunrise, planning our day, laughing at small things. I missed that sound. Her laughter could dissolve anger, and her eyes always carried a gentleness that grounded me. She would have known how to calm this storm inside me. But she was gone, and the only echo left was the one inside my head repeating the same question. How did we get here? When my wife passed, I thought I was prepared for loneliness. What I wasn't prepared for was distance. The kind that grows quietly between parent and child, not from anger, but from comfort. When children begin to build their own lives, they forget the scaffolding that held them steady. I was that scaffolding. Invisible, essential, and disposable once the structure stood on its own. I remember my daughter as a little girl sitting on the steps of this same house, wearing her mother's apron and pretending to cook. She used to call me her hero. I would return from work covered in sawdust, and she would run into my arms yelling, "My superhero smells like wood." That memory, once sweet, now ached like an old scar. Because somewhere along the line, I stopped being her hero and became her inconvenience. That realization hurts in a way that no betrayal between strangers ever could. The next few days blurred together. They carried on with their lives while I existed in the background. I could hear their conversations, the clink of glasses at dinner, the laughter that used to include me. I began to notice patterns in their behavior. Daniel's voice grew sharper, my daughter's more defensive. They were tense, even when I stayed silent. My presence, even unseen, unsettled them. That was my first quiet victory. One evening, I stepped out into the yard to breathe. The air was cold, the sky a canvas of fading orange and violet. I could see through the living room window. Daniel's parents sat comfortably on my sofa. The same one my wife and I had chosen from a small furniture shop on our anniversary. They looked at home. Two at home. I stood there until my daughter noticed me through the window. Her expression changed from surprise to irritation. She got up, opened the door slightly, and said, "Dad, it's freezing. Go back inside. You'll catch a cold." I looked at her and said, "Inside where?" Her lips tightened. She didn't answer. She just closed the door slowly. The click of that door was softer than the slam of the garage, but it cut deeper. In the days that followed, I tried to distract myself with small tasks. I organized old tools, polished metal handles, fixed things that no one asked me to fix. Every nail I hammered became a prayer for clarity. When you are stripped of everything familiar, even repetitive work becomes a language of healing. But every evening, I still heard their laughter. And every laugh reminded me that my kindness had become their comfort. That realization began to turn something inside me. People think revenge begins with anger. It doesn't. It begins with observation, with stillness, with noticing how people behave when they believe you have no power left. Daniel often came to the garage door without knocking. He would stand there, pretending to check something on the fuse box or asking if I needed anything. But his eyes always scanned the place, as if making sure I wasn't hiding valuables. One day he even said, "Dad, if you have any old stuff you're not using, we can help sell it. Make some space." I smiled and told him I'd think about it. That was the moment I knew how blind greed makes men careless. He had no idea that beneath those old cardboard boxes were the documents that would soon rewrite our roles completely. On the third week, I found an old photo of my wife tucked inside a tool drawer. She was sitting on the front porch, smiling, holding a cup of tea. On the back of the photo, in her handwriting, were the words, "Home is only real when love is inside." I stared at it for a long time. That sentence didn't break me. It steadied me. Because I realized something profound at night. They had taken the house, but they had no love inside it, which meant it was never truly theirs. That understanding brought peace. And with peace came clarity. I started taking quiet walks around the neighborhood, pretending to stretch my legs, but in truth, I was collecting information, observing, watching how neighbors handled real estate, how property agents spoke, how quickly houses sold. I listened more than I talked. Years of raising a family had taught me that silence gathers more power than shouting ever will. One evening, I overheard Daniel speaking on the phone outside. He was pacing, his tone impatient. "Yes, the refinance will go through once we get his signature. Don't worry, he trusts us." My blood ran cold. He was talking about me. That was when I knew exactly what they were planning. They wanted me to sign a new agreement that would make the house fully theirs. And that garage would no longer be a temporary place. It would be permanent exile. I went back to my small cot and sat there for hours, holding the photo of my wife. The old bulb above me flickered, and in that fragile light, I whispered, "You were right. Home is only real when love is inside." Then I added, "And when love leaves, it's just property. And property can be sold." That night, I dreamed of the day we first bought the house. My wife had chosen it because of the garden. I want a place where our daughter can play under apple trees, she said. We planted 2 small trees together that first spring. I could still see them outside the garage window, taller now, heavy with fruit. Life continues even when people lose their hearts. When I woke up, the decision was already made. Not in a burst of emotion, but with the stillness of inevitability. I would take back my power, not with anger, but with precision. But before justice comes understanding. And before understanding, there must be grief. So I allowed myself one last day to mourn the family I thought I had. I sat on the back steps at sunset, watching the lights flicker through the windows of my own house. The laughter, the movement, the silhouettes behind the curtains, they were all strangers now. And strangely, that realization didn't hurt as much as I expected. It freed me. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen while Daniel was preparing coffee. He looked startled to see me. "You're up early," he said, adjusting his tie. I smiled lightly. "Couldn't sleep. Mind if I have some?" He hesitated but handed me a cup. "Sure. How's the garage treating you?" "Perfectly fine," I said. "It's quiet there. Gives me time to think." He nodded, suspicious but trying to appear polite. "That's good. We all need space sometimes." "Yes," I said, staring at him over the rim of my cup. "Space can teach you who truly belongs where." He frowned slightly, unsure what I meant. I didn't explain. I simply thanked him for the coffee and walked back to the garage. As I closed the door behind me, I felt something shift inside. The humiliation had evaporated, leaving only focus. I began organizing every document, every legal paper I had ever kept. I studied them like sacred texts, marking details others would overlook. When people think you are broken, they stop watching you closely. That was their first mistake. One evening, my daughter came to the garage holding a folder. "Dad, Daniel said you needed to sign this," she said, her tone casual but her eyes nervous. "It's just some paperwork for the insurance." I looked at the folder. "Insurance, you say?" She nodded quickly. "Yes, just standard. Nothing major." I took the papers, flipping through them slowly. The fine print was small, but I had learned to read what most people ignore. Hidden among the legal phrases was a clause transferring full property rights to current co-owners. I looked up. "So this is insurance?" She froze. "That's what Daniel told me. He said you'd understand." I smiled, not angrily, but with a calm she couldn't read. "Of course. Leave it with me. I'll sign it tomorrow." She exhaled in relief and walked away. She didn't notice the quiet smile forming on my lips. Because the moment she left, I pulled out my own folder. The real documents. The original deed. The one that proved everything still belonged to me. The one Daniel had never seen. That night, I placed both folders side by side on the table and whispered to myself, "You can sleep in the garage, old man, but the house still sleeps in your name." The next morning, I made my first call. Not to a lawyer, not yet. To an old friend named Robert, a real estate agent I hadn't spoken to in years. He answered in surprise, his voice warm. "Well, if it isn't the builder himself, how's retirement?" "Quiet," I said. "Too quiet. I might be looking to make a change." He laughed. "At your age? What kind of change?" I looked around at the concrete walls of the garage and said, "The kind that sells quickly and leaves a lesson behind." He paused. "You're serious. More serious than I've ever been." We talked for an hour. By the time I hung up, the wheels of justice were already turning. That night, as I sat by the dim light again, I could hear Daniel's laughter coming from the dining room. His father's booming voice joined in, followed by my daughter's softer tone. They were celebrating something. Perhaps the papers they thought I would sign tomorrow. I listened quietly, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, and thought, celebrate while you can. Because peace is sweetest right before the storm begins. In the corner, the photo of my wife seemed to glow faintly under the lamplight. Her smile no longer felt like a memory. It felt like approval. There is a moment when a man stops bargaining with his own hurt. Not a shout, not a dramatic breaking point. It is a quiet, undeniable line crossed in the middle of an ordinary day, when the sum of small indignities finally equals a decision. For me, that moment arrived like the first cold strike of winter, clear, unavoidable, and precise. It was late afternoon. The light through the garage window had that shallow, silver tone that comes before evening. I was cleaning an old toolbox when I heard footsteps in the yard. Not the soft shuffle of someone passing by, but quick, purposeful steps heading straight for my door. Daniel stood there, arms crossed, the same perfect haircut, the same casual arrogance. Behind him, my daughter pressed her lips together, as if holding back words. He didn't bother with the polite small talk this time. "You're being difficult, Dad," he said flat. "We just want to move forward. Sign the papers, and this is over. You can stay as long as you like in the garage, but the house needs to be legally ours." I wiped my hands on a rag and looked at him. The rag smelled faintly of oil and cedar. "So that's it. You tell me what to do and I do it. It's just paperwork," he said. "It's standard. We have the mortgage to refinance, and the loan requires clear ownership on our end. It's easier for everyone." I could see his impatience like a sheen on his skin. He thought pressure would force compliance. He did not know that pressure, applied correctly, can bend situations to your will. "Let me see them," I said. He reached into his jacket and produced a folder. It felt light in his hand, like a weight he imagined would crush me. Inside, the pages were glossy and numbered, the language designed to sound reasonable and inevitable. I scanned the first line slowly. Insurance. Authorization. Transfer of consent. But then a phrase caught my eye, carefully tucked at the bottom of a page in font so small most people would miss it. It spoke of notarized consent and of the binder clause that required a co-signer from all joint owners. He expected me to sign without reading. He expected complacency. I closed the folder and looked up at him. "You forgot one thing," I said. "This needs notarization and a witness from all owners. Where's my signature as a voluntary resignation of primary title?" He straightened, a little stunned. "You signed before, Dad. You said you trusted us." "I never resigned the title," I said quietly. "You included me on the deed for a reason. You know that." He blinked, the composure faltering for a second. Behind him, my daughter's face tightened in a way that felt like regret and a little fear. She stepped forward. "Dad, please. We can explain. This is all legal procedure. You're making it harder." I inhaled the air of the garage, smelled the metal and the old wood. The smell steadied me. I thought of my wife's hands, calloused from years of folding laundry and sewing school uniforms. I thought of her voice telling me to be careful with my temper. I thought of the way she would look at me when she trusted a decision was right. And in that slow breath, the last thread of my bargaining snapped. "If you want the legal ownership to change," I said, "we will do it properly. With witnesses. With a notary. and with my lawyer reviewing the documents. Until then, nothing changes. Daniel's face reddened. You're stalling. This is ridiculous. I'm not stalling, I replied. I am protecting what is mine. What I built. For your sake and for yours. He laughed in a sharp, brittle sound. Protect? From what? Yourself? This is just delaying the inevitable. That word, inevitable, irked me. Nothing about family, about trust, should ever be inevitable. If it is inevitable, it means people gave up trying to be decent. He left then, but not before throwing a final barb over his shoulder. You'll regret this, old man. Regret is an odd currency. It belonged to the one who speaks it, not the one who hears it. I watched them disappear into the house, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something that was not shame or anger. I felt a steady readiness. The humiliation had transformed into resolve. That night, I did something I had not done since the early days of marriage. I wrote a list, not of grievances, but of precise steps. What needed to happen, who I needed to call, what facts would support my cause. The paper felt solid under my hand, and the act of putting pen to paper became a ritual of reclamation. Item 1. Contact Robert, the real estate friend. He was already in motion. That morning's conversation had been a seed. Item 2. Find a lawyer who respected me, not my enemies. Item 3. Prepare the house to sell quickly, but with conditions that would sting the ones who thought they owned me. I imagined their faces when paperwork arrived and when offers were made. Not out of malice, but to teach them consequence. Justice, in my mind, was not cruelty. It was clarity. For the first time, I allowed myself to indulge in strategic thinking. I considered the tax implications, the timing of a listing, the difference between a regular sale and a quick cash deal. I thought about staging, curb appeal, presenting the house as an object of desire. Sell the shell, but keep the lesson inside. Because there is nothing more humiliating for someone who stole comfort than finding out the thing they coveted can vanish overnight. The days blurred into a meticulous rhythm. I kept my garage life intact, but moved like a shadow through my own house. I polished brass door handles when no one watched, straightened crooked picture frames, made the bed in my old room with an attention that felt ceremonial. I planted fresh annuals in the front beds. Small gestures to wake the neighborhood into noticing the pride that had always existed here. At the same time, I worked behind the scenes. I met with Robert in a quiet cafe, his hands wrapped around a thermos. He was all business and warmth, a perfect combination. He said things that were both practical and reassuring. We'll price it to attract serious buyers. Fast closes, no nonsense. But we'll also make sure the process is public, clear. No backdoor tricks. Public, I repeated. I like that. Public humiliation is not my aim. Public clarity is. If they believe they could push me into the margins, they deserve to see the truth in broad daylight. Next, I found a lawyer named Elena. She had an office with books stacked from floor to ceiling, law tomes with spines worn from use. She listened, not with sympathy, but with a mind that enjoyed a strategy. She read my documents, pulled the original deed, and smiled in a way that made me trust her immediately. You are not as careless as they think, she said. There are clauses here that bind them to specific actions. We can use those. What do you need? I asked. Time, information, proof of their intentions, she said. We will document everything. If they try to move assets or coerce signatures, it will be on record. For now, play along, but keep them talking. Let them reveal their eagerness. Playing along felt strange, like pretending to be a marionette to gather the strings. But I had learned to be patient. A small victory came in the form of a delivery. 2 days after my first meetings, Daniel asked me to sign a simple document they called a consent addendum. He tried to make it sound casual, like a favor I owed them. The paper had a space for my signature and a notary line that would formalize everything. I smiled and told him I would sign, and that I had just called my lawyer to review it. Panic flickered across his face for a fraction of a second. He tried to hide it with irritation. "Dad, we don't have time for this," he said. "We need it signed today." "I understand," I said. "But if you want it done properly, we should do it through the lawyer. It protects everyone." His impatience revealed more than words. He wanted speed because speed hides mistakes. I allowed him his urgency. I wrote his name neatly on a sticky note and left the rest to Elena. The next week, a strange thing happened. Daniel began to make mistakes he never made before. He forgot to mention the refinance in an email. He misfiled a receipt. He started speaking too loudly on the phone within earshot of neighbors. When you push someone who relies on quick wins, his impatience becomes a liability. I watched, taking mental notes. Meanwhile, I prepared the house for market without alarm. I cleaned closets, boxed up personal items with a slow, reverent pace, and left certain things where they would be noticed. A framed certificate of my wife's volunteer work in the living room. A stack of my workshop magazines on a coffee table. A careful arrangement of photos that hinted at a life built with labor, love, and time. One evening, my daughter came into the garage looking tired. She sat on the edge of the cot and did not speak at first. The lamplight softened her face. "Dad," she said finally, "we're just trying to make the house work. Why are you making this difficult?" I looked at her and felt no sudden surge of anger. I felt pity for the woman who believed the measure of family was convenience. "Because you think property is all that matters," I said. "Because you forgot why anyone wanted to live here to begin with." She looked taken aback. "I know you miss Mom, but this is unfair." "Unfair?" I echoed. "You gave me the garage, and you call that fairness?" She began to cry small, quick sobs that surprised her. In that moment, I saw the child I had once held as she learned to tie her shoes, and the woman she became bruised by convenience, not cruelty. The sight of her pain made me consider a softer outcome. Could there be a path that returned dignity to both of us? Perhaps. But the lesson had to be learned fully. I rose and placed my hand on her shoulder. "I don't want to hurt you," I said. "I want you to remember." Her tears were wet and hot. She squeezed my hand like she used to when she was small and frightened. For a heartbeat, something like the old intimacy returned. But when she left the garage, she closed the door with more force than necessary. That force confirmed my choice. Lessons are rarely gentle. They are precise and sometimes necessary. As the weeks moved on, offers began to appear. Robert had been effective. He staged the house with a tasteful restraint that made potential buyers imagine themselves living here. The open house brought polite strangers admiring crown moldings, hardwood floors, and a garden that smelled faintly of rosemary. People spoke about the neighborhood, about morning walks, about the quality of schools. They did not know the story that churned within the walls. When the first serious offer came, Daniel was at the table counting numbers in a way that suggested greed had sharpened his vision. He showed the offer to my daughter like a trophy. They both assumed the speed of the sale would lock everything in their favor. That night, in the garage, I sat with Elena and Robert. We reviewed the offer and the conditions. The deal looked clean, but the timing could be arranged to make the point clear. We would accept a quick cash offer with a closing date that left them reeling. The house would be sold, the keys handed to new owners, and yet I intended to leave them holding the consequences of their own choices. Playing justice is not about cruelty. It is about consequence, and about giving people a mirror that shows the shape of their decisions. I slept that night with a strange peace. The breaking point had passed. In its place stood a man who understood the economy of dignity. There is a rhythm to planning, like the steady tick of a clock that counts out each small move until the whole machine hums. Revenge, properly understood, is not a burst of fury. It is careful engineering. I treated it like I treated the houses I built: measure twice, cut once, and never trust the finish until every joint is secure. After the meeting with Elena and Robert, I sat at the workbench with a legal pad. The pages filled up with headings and subheadings. I numbered contingencies. I sketched timelines. The plan had to be airtight, but it also had to be public enough that they could not hide behind excuses. Transparency would be my ally. Step 1 was simple: document everything. Elena insisted on this. She told me to record conversations when possible, to keep copies of emails, to save receipts and invoices that showed intent. People who act in secret are sloppy, she said. They leave traces because they are in a hurry. She was right. Daniel's haste had already revealed cracks. So I began collecting evidence with the patience of a man who knew how long it took wood to season. I saved voicemails where Daniel asked me to sign quickly. I kept notes of his offhand comments about refinancing. I saved the folder my daughter had handed me that pretended to be insurance, but masked transfer clauses. I bought a small digital recorder and left it in the living room during family gatherings, tucked near a potted fern as if it were a simple ornament. I pretended it was for ambient music. People spoke differently when they thought no one was recording. Step 2. Prepare the house for sale, but in a way that would maximize the speed of transaction while minimizing the opportunity for underhanded maneuvers. Robert recommended pricing slightly below market to attract serious buyers willing to close fast. Cash buyers move quickly, he said. They like certainty. They hate drama. That suited my purpose perfectly. I wanted new owners who would walk in with the authority of bankers and the patience of people who write checks without emotion. The quicker the sale, the less time Daniel had to manipulate documents. Step 3. Set legal traps that were not traps at all, but standard protections. Elena drafted an addendum that would require clear notarized acknowledgement from all parties for any change in title. She also included a clause that prevented any transfers for a short cooling-off period unless signed in the presence of a neutral notary. It was a small window, but enough to force Daniel into transparency. Step 4. Prepare the narrative. People who steal comforts rely on the belief that silence will shield them. I wanted the truth to be known. So we planned a public notice. Robert suggested a tasteful flyer for the neighborhood and a listing that mentioned recent renovations, invite-only showings, and immediate possession. The announcement would make it clear the house was on the market and that interested parties could contact an agent directly. Publicity would protect the process. I worked on these steps methodically, while keeping my outward life simple. I continued my routines in the garage, the rhythm of hammers and sanding keeping me steady. At night, I reviewed the schedules with Elena, adjusting closing dates and contingency plans so nothing could catch us by surprise. There were setbacks, as there always are. The first came when Daniel discovered I had contacted a real estate agent. His anger flared in front of my daughter like a sudden storm. "Why would you do that without telling us?" he demanded one afternoon as I sat at the kitchen table filling out a small repair log. "Because I said I might make a change," I answered, calm. "I did not say I needed your permission." He threw his hands up. "You used to be a reasonable man." "What happened to you? Why are you trying to make this dramatic?" His voice trembled with impatience, and the sound of someone who understood their game might be slipping. He went on to rage about plans and costs, and how my interference would complicate refinancing. He accused me of being selfish. That word landed with a dull thud. Selfish. They used the language of convenience to mask their own greed. I told him nothing more, then retreated to the garage where the rhythm of sanding smoothed the edges of that exchange. Another setback was more practical. A potential buyer who had visited the house sent a request for immediate possession contingent on a minor repair to the roof. The inspector had found old flashing that needed replacement. Robert was pragmatic. "We could hurry the repair," he said, "but that will cost. Do you want to spend on repairs now?" I thought for a long moment and then agreed. I hired a roofer discreetly and paid in cash. I wanted the house to appear flawless to buyers, not because the house needed to be perfect, but because the optics had to be impeccable. Let them regret their assumptions when the house passed hands like a sealed envelope. There were also emotional setbacks. My daughter began to call me more often, her voice apologetic soft. She knelt one evening beside the garage and begged me not to make things worse. "Please, Dad," she said. "I don't want our family to be torn apart. I miss how we used to be." Her words were knives and balm at once. I wanted, more than anything, to take her in my arms and fix whatever had frayed between us. But I also knew that letting her off the hook would teach the wrong lesson. I told her what I felt without screaming, explaining that letting injustice slide only teaches people how far they can go. She cried then, small and honest, and I promised to keep her dignity in mind. I meant it. Justice was not meant to destroy, it was meant to correct. Small victories began to accumulate like pebbles in my pocket. Daniel slipped when he tried to move documents behind my back. An email meant to mislead was forwarded to Elena by mistake. A neighbor mentioned seeing Daniel pacing with a stack of paper at dawn, muttering about numbers. Each small error built a legal picture for us. We scheduled the open house on a sunny Saturday when foot traffic tends to be high. I spent the morning placing fresh flowers, arranging the living room just as my wife would have liked, letting the sunlight warm the old rug my daughter had spilled juice on years ago. We left the gate open. I wanted strangers to walk in and feel invited. I wanted them to see a home that had been loved. The open house was busier than we expected. People wandered through, commenting on hardwood floors, the kitchen island, the way light flooded the back room. A young couple lingered by the fruit trees in the yard and talked about planting a swing. I watched them and thought about the laughter that might fill my house once more this time without the theft of kindness. While they toured, Daniel cornered a potential buyer with a sense of urgency, offering terms too favorable, desperate even. "We can move quick," he told the man, voice low. "Cash, immediate possession. You'll get a deal." He handed over a glossy brochure with a nervous smile. That night, as Elena, Robert, and I went over the offers, Daniel's eagerness became his own undoing. One buyer offered cash, but requested special language in the purchase agreement that would allow them delay in transfer of utilities and keys for a week. Elena flagged it immediately as odd. "Why would a cash buyer want delayed possession?" she asked. "It's a red flag." We passed on that buyer. We accepted an offer from a local family who wanted immediate possession and who had been through a clean pre-qualification process. Their bank-confirmed funds were ready. The closing date was set for 2 weeks hence. When Daniel learned which offer we accepted, he searched for a way to contest it, claiming he had an agreement for first right of refusal. Elena smiled and showed him recorded emails that proved otherwise. He sputtered, then lowered his head. He had expected speed to carry him through. Speed without caution is a liability in the wrong hands. I remember the day we handed the keys to the new owners like a quiet surrender. We signed papers in the presence of witnesses and a notary, the sun warming the room. Daniel came and stood by the window, his jaw clenched so hard I could see the fullness of his anger. My daughter wept silently. He said nothing. They had a chance to stop the sale. They could have protested, sought injunctions, tried to manipulate the closing. But the law, like a careful instrument, depends on facts and process. We had built both. Their options were few. On the final day, when the buyers took possession, I walked through each room deliberately. I touched the banister, felt the worn spot on the kitchen floor where a chair had scraped for years, and paused by the window where my wife used to place a pot of basil. The house had been my life's work. Selling it was not a surrender so much as a lesson delivered. I made a small decision then. I would not gloat. There was no pleasure in revenge that looked like cruelty. I left a note in the middle drawer of the hall table, a simple piece of paper in my wife's handwriting that my daughter would recognize. It read, in her looping script, "Home is real where love lives." I added beneath it, in my own careful writing, "Remember this when the house feels empty." When the new family drove away, waving with polite smiles, I felt something unexpected. A lightness like someone removing a heavy coat. The household that had taken refuge behind my walls would now be someone else's concern, and that was as it should be. There were small consequences for my daughter and Daniel too. Friends who had once complimented their house now pinged with questions about the sudden sale. Daniel's parents found themselves without the fantasy of a long vacation in what they thought would be a ready room. The neighbors who had admired their hosting began to murmur about sudden changes. Consequence had a way of rippling outward. In the quiet that followed, Elena reminded me of what mattered. "You acted with restraint," she said. "You gave them chance after chance. You followed process." I looked at her and felt the truth of her words. "I did not want to break them," I said. "I wanted them to remember." She nodded. "Remembering is a form of justice." When I returned to the garage that night, I sat on the cot and listened to the sound of the house settling. The absence of their voices was a space I had reclaimed. My daughter texted me that evening, a single message, "I am sorry." The simplicity of those 2 words felt heavy with things she could not yet say aloud. I kept the message on my phone and did not answer immediately. Some wounds close faster when given room. I intended to leave a space for healing, but not at the cost of forgetting. The day of reckoning came quietly. The air smelled of cut grass and new beginnings. The papers had been signed, the sale was sealed, and all that remained was the exchange of keys. I stood by the doorway, the one I had built with my own hands decades ago, and waited for them to arrive. Daniel walked in first, stiff in a suit that didn't quite fit his mood. My daughter followed, her eyes red from crying. They had come to negotiate one last time. Pride disguised as desperation. "Dad, we can fix this," she said, voice trembling. "You don't have to go through with it. Just cancel the sale." I shook my head slowly. "It's done. The papers are filed, the funds are cleared. The house belongs to its new owners." Daniel's face darkened. "You're throwing away everything." You think this makes you noble? No, I said. It makes me free. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You'll regret this. I smiled faintly. You already do. At that moment, the buyers arrived. A quiet family, polite and composed. The mother greeted me warmly, unaware of the storm swirling in that room. She handed me a small envelope. We just wanted to thank you for trusting us, she said. Inside was a simple card. May your next home bring you peace. I looked at my daughter then. That's all I ever wanted here. Peace. Tears filled her eyes. She reached for me, but Daniel pulled her back, his pride unwilling to let humility breathe. I handed the keys to the new owners, one by one, feeling the weight lift from my palm. When the door closed behind them, Daniel turned to me with a hollow laugh. Where will you even go? He asked, mocking, his voice breaking slightly. To a place where people mean what they say, I answered. To a home that doesn't need to prove itself. I walked past him, the sound of my boots echoing on the wooden floor. My daughter followed me outside. Dad, wait, she whispered. I'm sorry. I paused by the car. The wind carried the scent of rain, and somewhere distant, thunder rolled. I know, I said. And one day, you'll understand. I left them standing on the porch, surrounded by a house that no longer recognized them. Behind me, the windows reflected their shapes, two silhouettes caught between regret and realization. That evening, as I reached the small lake cabin I had purchased, the water shimmered in the fading light. The air was quiet except for the gentle lapping of waves. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and set the old photo of my wife on the mantel. For you, I said softly. For everything we built. The silence was warm this time, not lonely. I sat by the window, watching the ripples fade across the lake, and for the first time in years, I breathed without the weight of walls. Justice, I realized, isn't revenge. It's peace reclaimed. What would you have done in my place? Comment below, like this video, and subscribe for more stories of justice, family, and quiet strength.